Hello everybody and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworld. Today's video will be a Season 1 Warband review, looking at the Steelheart champions, and I have their lore written here. I'll let you guys look through it if you want to. It's in the Shadespire rulebook, but just to summarize, they're basically Stormcast Eternals, which means that every time they die, they sort of get brought back to life in the realm of Sigmar, losing a little bit of themselves each time, becoming a little bit colder, and they've come to Shadespire to look for some kind of a cure to that whole losing part of themselves every time they're resurrected syndrome, because Shadespire is all about things dying and then coming back to life. During this review, I'm going to be looking at the fighter cards, the faction-specific cards, that being the objective and power cards, and I'm going to be rating the whole warband on a scale of S to D, trying to look at the whole warband in its entirety and how the cards complement the fighter cards and how they perform in any given meta. And we're going to be starting with the fighter cards. So fighter cards are pretty straightforward for Steelheart's champions. There's 3 units. They're all pretty tough. They have 4 wounds going from 1 guard or one block to 2 block shield defense when inspired. They're all inspired with the same mechanic where you roll either a shield or a crit on a defense die. So basically rolling in any kind of a success on a defense die will cause this warband to become inspired. And they hit pretty hard, as you can see. I'm going to be zooming in to each specific unit here. We got Severin Steelheart, who is the leader of this faction. He hits with a pretty average level of accuracy with 2 hammers, but deals a lot of damage, doing 3 damage before and after being inspired. Upon being inspired, he gets a scything attack with an accuracy of 2 hammers, doing 2 damage to all adjacent targets. We have Oberyn the Bold, who's almost identical to Steelheart, minus the fact that he has a knockback mechanic. And upon becoming inspired, he gains cleave, so he's a little bit more versatile, albeit he doesn't have a scything attack. Finally, we have Angarad Brightshield, who's slightly more defensive, being that when she inspires, she gets a parry attack action, doing 1 damage, and she's also slightly more accurate, hitting successfully on a 3 hammer strike, but only doing 2 damage, so a little bit less damage dealing, but more accurate. So this is the warband. Pros being that they have a number of special combat abilities. Oberyn has a knockback ability whether or not he's inspired. Steelheart gets scything when inspired. Oberyn gets cleave when inspired, and Brightshield has a counter attack when inspired. They also have good defense, rolling 2 defense die looking for block, so that little shield icon, but only when they're inspired. Prior to being inspired, it's not very exceptional. They have high wounds, so 4 wounds across the board. Decent accuracy, always hitting on hammers. They do high damage, so 2 to 3 damage, so nothing really below that except for the parry counter attack. And another pro is that they have a small model number, which is nice in the sense that there's fewer targets for the enemy to attack, making it a little bit more challenging for aggro warbands to gain glory point through objective cards by killing your units. They also have a number of cons. Main con being low movement. 3 movement at any given point makes it very difficult for them to cover any significant ground. They have no range capability. Their inspire mechanic is unreliable, requiring them a 50% chance to successfully inspire when they get attacked. They have no special abilities. So they have special combat abilities, but they don't have any special abilities like Sepulchral Guard's resurrection ability. And the small model number, although being positive, can also be negative in the sense that they struggle to hold objective tokens, seeing as there's fewer models, and there's fewer options for actions, and it's actually not uncommon for Steelheart's champions to just sort of run out of activations. So charge, 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 4th activation, I guess we'll just draw a power card. That type of situation is pretty common. So those were the fighter cards. Now we're going to be looking at the faction-specific cards, starting with the objective cards. Starting with the Surge, we have Awe-Inspiring. Score this immediately if your warband has taken 2 or more fighters out of action in this phase. Worth 1 glory point. It's a score immediate, but it's actually very hard to pull off, having this warband kill 2 units in any given turn. Very challenging, especially with their small movement. I'm going to rate this as a C. Next, you have Lightning Strikes. Score this immediately if an enemy fighter is taken out of action by a charge made by one of your fighters. So usually when your warband actually takes a unit out, it will probably be through a charge action because they don't have any ranged attacks. But if you draw this in the first hand and you're playing against a warband that's very evasive, it could be pretty challenging to pull off. So I'm going to give it a B. I can't really justify giving it a higher ranking than that. So those are our surge cards. Next, we're going to look into the score in the end phase cards, starting with Cleanse. Score this in an end phase if you hold all the objectives in enemy territory, worth 3. I'm giving this a D because in order to pull this off, your warband has to basically be completely dedicated to holding objective tokens, which is very difficult for them considering they have a lack of push cards and poor movement. There's no guarantee whether or not there's going to be 2 or 3 or even more tokens in your enemy's territory at any given time, and this faction doesn't have any ability to push objectives around or destroy objectives. So pulling this card off would be very difficult, definitely does not fit within their strengths. We have Consecrated Area. Score this in an end phase if there are no enemy fighters adjacent to your fighters. I'm giving this a B because it's possible if you want to make an effort to hit fighters and drive them back, or if you want to play a very defensive format where you just avoid combat entirely. This is pretty scoreable, but it's only worth 1 glory, so I wouldn't want to center a deck around it. We have a movable object. Score this in an end phase if the same friendly fighter has held the same objective at the end of 2 consecutive action phases, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a D because it completely ties up one of your 3 characters, okay, which is a small warband to begin with, having them hold an objective for 2 full rounds and only getting 1 glory out of it. So that's a wasted card in my opinion. We have Seize Ground. Score this in an end phase if you hold an objective in enemy territory. I'm going to give this a B because if you decide to play an aggro style and you get into your opponent's territory, it's pretty realistic to be able to grab one of the objective tokens in that territory and hopefully just not get knocked off of it before the end of the round. We have Sigmar's Bulwark. Score this in an end phase if none of your fighters suffered any damage in the preceding action phase, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a D. So it's pretty unrealistic to expect not to take any damage, even if you play a very defensive style where you don't advance at all, because of ploys, because of gambits, because of the ability of units to teleport, because of high movement, because of the fact that these guys only have 1 shield defense before they're inspired. All these things put together make this card practically impossible to pull off. We have Slayers of Tyrants. Score this in an end phase if your warband took an enemy leader out of action in the preceding action phase, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a C because it's hard taking out an enemy leader, especially with a warband with low movement, and it's only worth 1 glory in an end phase. So here's the summary of the Surge and the score in the end phase objective cards. Finally, we're going to look at their 1 score in the 3rd end phase objective card, that being Eternals. Score this in the 3rd end phase if none of your fighters are out of action, worth 3 glory points. I'm giving this a D as well, just because, I mean, it's a competitive game, it's an aggressive game, things hit hard, you could do damage outside of actual attacks. 4 wounds is good, but it's not very difficult to put 4 wounds of damage on any unit, especially when they only have 1 shield defense. And these guys aren't getting inspired until they actually roll a successful defense, which requires them to be engaged in combat anyway, so I don't think that this is very likely to score at all. So just to summarize what these cards do in general, they're designed for taking enemy fighters out of action, for holding objectives in enemy territory, and for avoiding damage. So that seems to be the promoted play style of the objective cards of the Steelheart champions. So now we're going to take a look at the power cards. Let's just go through them one at a time, starting with the first ploy being Heroic Guard. Choose a friendly fighter, put them on guard. Pretty solid. I'm giving it a B, especially since now guard prevents drive back. It's a good card. We have Invulnerable. Your leader has +1 defense for the first attack action in the next activation. This is getting a D. I mean, it's so easy to avoid. If I play this card in a power phase, next round during the enemy's turn, I mean, if they avoid attacking my leader and attack one of my other guys, this card is just wasted. Or they might even just take an approach of not attacking whatsoever and just go on guard or draw a power card, or many ways to avoid having any consequence from this card. Peal of Thunder. Choose an enemy fighter and push them 1 hex in any direction. Faction-specific distraction, it's good. I'm giving it an A. We have Righteous Zeal. +1 damage to the first attack action with a range of 1 or 2 in the next activation. Also pretty good. I'm giving it a B just because an extra damage is always a solid thing to have. Sigmarite Wall. Choose 2 adjacent friendly fighters and put them on guard. Very good card. I'm giving this an A because getting 2 guys on guard, very solid. It's just that you have to play a playstyle where your guys are clustering together. Storm Forged Resistance. Friendly fighters cannot be driven back by the first attack action in the next activation. I'm giving this a B because it's pretty solid, especially if you're trying to advance on a warband that's trying to keep you away from them. With the low movement, getting driven back can just be a massive pain and waste an entire activation for 1 or 2 units. This prevents that, which is very nice. It's also good if you want to take an objective holding play style, although I don't really recommend that. We have Stormforged Tactics. So you basically play this in a power step. In the following activation, you will be able to use this reaction. After an enemy fighter's attack action that fails, choose up to 2 friendly fighters and push them up to 1 hex each. So this is a terrible card. So first of all, you have to declare that it's your goal to successfully defend against an attack. And only then will you gain the benefit if you successfully defend the attack in the next activation. So your opponent can either decide not to attack whatsoever, or if they attack and they hit, which isn't unlikely, especially since these guys only have 1 shield before they're inspired, then this card gets wasted anyway. So I don't see any value of putting this into anybody's deck. You got Tireless Assault. Play this after a friendly fighter's attack action that fails. That fighter can make another attack action that targets the same fighter. So you basically get a double swing. You swing, you miss, you swing again. That's always good. I'm giving it a B. We have Undaunted. Play this after an attack action or ploy that takes a friendly fighter out of action, leaving 1 surviving friendly fighter on the battlefield. Remove all wound tokens from the surviving fighter. So in other words, if you have 1 guy left, or rather, let's say you have 2 guys left, the moment one of those gets taken out, whoever is left gets all their wound tokens cleared, which could be really nice, assuming that unit has any wound tokens. If they don't have any wound tokens, this card goes to waste. And if your warband manages to not get beaten down to just 1 unit, this card goes to waste too. So because it's so circumstantial, I'll give it a C. We have Unstoppable Strike. First attack action gets Cleave in the next activation. I'm giving it a B because Cleave is always nice. It could also help you score what armor if you have that as a universal card in your hand. And finally, Valiant Attack. Enemy fighters cannot support the target of the first attack action in the next activation. This is very good for Steelheart's Scything attack. So you play this, run them into the center of 3 or 4 guys, do the scything, they can't support each other. It really helps land that 2 damage blow. So I'm going to give this a B. So those are our ploys. Just to give a quick summary of what they do in the general sense is they improve defense by providing guard tokens, by preventing drive back. They increase the accuracy of attacks by giving you that whole double swing. They increase the damage of attacks, and they can alter enemy position. So this is just a general overview of what the Gambit cards promote. Next, we have the upgrade cards, starting with Blessed by Sigmar. +1 wound, very solid, especially for a warband that's meant to be hardy and meant to be defensively oriented. So I'm giving this an A. There's Block, which is equipped on Bright Shield and allows her as an action to put herself and all adjacent friendly fighters on guard. I'm giving this an S just because if anybody decides to play this warband in a clustering style, then this becomes an amazing card. I mean, she spends 1 action, all 3 of these guys are on guard, can't get driven back, dodges count in their defense roll. If they're on the 2 shield because they're inspired, they get 2 dice roll where dodges count as well. They'd be supporting each other. I mean, altogether, this could be a very strong card if used right. Brave Strike by Oberyn. Just a basic attack, but you get to roll an extra attack die if Oberyn is by himself at the cost of 1 damage. So I'm giving this a C because I just feel that his normal attack is better. I mean, he has Cleave if he's inspired or knockback generally. It always does 3 damage. Based on the other cards, you'd want to cluster your units together anyway to take full benefit of your power cards. So he wouldn't be alone in those situations. So I don't feel that this card is worth adding to your deck. A Steelheart exclusive card called Fatal Repost, where basically you have a 50% chance to make a counter attack if Steelheart makes a successful defense action. So this is good, minus the fact that there's so many conditions. So the unit that is attacking you has to do a melee attack, and they have to miss, and then you have to succeed the 50% roll, and then you have to succeed your attack in order for this to really profit you. So because of all those conditions, I can only give it a B, but if it does land, it's a 3 damage hit. So in that sense, I can't really give it anything lower than B because it could be a big game turner if it works out. Heroic Might, Steelheart and Oberyn can get Cleave added to their attack action. So I'm giving this a B just because uninspired, it's very nice for both. Inspired, Oberyn can get Cleave and Knockback on his swing, and then Severin getting Cleave is also very nice, especially with his scything attack. So it's just overall solid. Heroic Stride, Steelheart. If an enemy fighter ends their activation within 2 hexes of him, he can be pushed 1 hex. So this is good if your warband tends to be clustering, as I described before, because then if they're attacking Steelheart or another unit, then Steelheart can start taking steps around before their attack action in order to get into ideal supporting positions or just counter-attacking positions. So it can be good, but it's very circumstantial, so I'm giving it a C. You have a Lightning Blade for Steelheart, which is +1 damage on a crit, but it has range of 2, so it gives him a little bit more range, but lower damage, same 2 hits. I'm giving it a C because his main attacks just do so much more damage that this doesn't seem like a great option. If anything, I'd give this guy a ranged attack for 3 swords for 1 damage if I'm going to try to get the extra reach out of him. Lightning Blast. When they make a critical hit, Oberyn can inflict 1 damage on fighters adjacent to the target. So I'm going to give this a C. It's very conditional. You have to land a crit on 2 hammers, which is very unlikely. And only if you land that crit will you get the benefit of hurting adjacent enemy fighters, and there might not even be any adjacent enemy fighters. So way too conditional for me to consider to be a good card. Righteous Strike. It's a range 1 with 3 hammers for 2 damage, and as a reaction, if the target was a leader, you can make this attack action again. So this is great if you want to make Bright Shield an anti-leader type of unit, but with her low movement, and the fact this is 2 damage anyway, it just doesn't seem like the most worthwhile approach for her, especially since she's going to be playing cards like Block to try to buff the other allies who actually do more damage. So I'm giving this a C. Shield Bash, as a reaction, Bright Shield, if she's attacked and the attack fails, cannot be driven back and can push the attacker. So very circumstantial. If she's hit and that attack misses, she can push the attacker. So I mean, it's kind of good, but not great. I mean, maybe a B, but I gave it a C. And finally, we have Steelheart second. If a fighter is adjacent to Steelheart, they have +1 damage. So this is not great, especially since every meta has great strength, which is a guaranteed +1 damage. But this could be good if you have a ranged attacker. So if you put Bright Shield next to Steelheart with some kind of a range 3 universal upgrade, then it would do 2 damage. So aside from that, it's not very useful, so I'm only giving this a C. So as to summarize the general purpose of these upgrades, we can see that they help improve defense by providing more wounds, by putting units on guard. They can deal circumstantial extra damage with the Lightning Blade, with the Fatal Repost. They can help units cleave. They give that out-of-turn attack action, which is that Fatal Repost. And they also provide some unexceptional upgraded weapons for the Steelheart's champions. And this is my summary of all the objective, ploys, and upgrades with the ratings that I've given them. So if you look at objectives, you can see that there's really none that are exceptional. I mean, they probably average about a C, which is pretty awful for objectives. Ploys are decent, averaging around a B. And upgrades, I mean, aside from 2 that are pretty awesome, the S and the A tier, the rest are not really that amazing. All right, and that summarizes my evaluation of the fighter cards, of the faction-specific cards, and now it's time to rate this warband as a whole. So rating. Summary point number 1. Objective cards mostly promote engaging enemies and holding objectives. However, this warband has a lack of movement, and they have a lack of push options to reach enemies or to reliably hold objectives, and because there's a small unit number, it prevents a flex style of holding objectives while attacking. The power cards illustrate that the best tactic of Steelheart's champions is to stick together and cluster and guard and support each other, because that's what their power cards seem to encourage. But they have a lack of objective cards to actually encourage this kind of playstyle. They're being asked to just go out and attack or to hold objectives, which forces them to become separated from each other. Their strength is intended to lie in their defense. You know, they're heavily armored, they get 2 shields, they have a lot of wounds, they have guard power cards. They have all these things that are meant to encourage the fact that this is a defensive warband. But the biggest problem they have is that their defense is weak until they're attacked. So a unit who has 1 shield has to be attacked, and only if they roll a success, which probably won't stop them from taking damage anyway, will they actually get inspired and get 2 shields, which then actually makes them intimidating and hard to hit. So this is counterintuitive. They can only actually become stronger in defense after they're already damaged and compromised in their defense. So WTF. Finally, they have a number of special combat abilities. They can scythe, they have a parry, they can cleave, they can knock back, but that's all locked behind their inspire mechanic, and it's not encouraged by any objective cards. So when we look at this warband as a whole, I got to give these guys a D. I mean, they're the lowest tier, need the most help out of any warband, or as much help as any warband for sure. And that's what we're going to be talking about in my next video, which will be a balance video, which I'm going to be linking in the description. So you can see all the suggestions I make in terms of errata, in terms of faction-specific cards that can be added to help improve them and bring them up to a level where they can compete against the strong warbands like Thorns of the Briar Queen or Grimwatch or whatever. So thanks for watching, guys. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please write them in the comments below. Please like and subscribe to help support me and encourage me. And I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you next time.